Okay, so we're going to start with our first presentation today. We have Ms. Karine Moorman. She has been an educator for the last 5 years. She holds a BHSC degree in nursing science from the University of the Free State. And she recently completed her master's degree with us at Nelson Mandela University and is looking forward to enhancing her contributions to nursing education in practice. And she is going to do a presentation on student perceptions of online teaching at a private nursing college in the Eastern Cape. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And especially after this morning's couch conversation, I feel honored to be here and to share with you what my students said about their online teaching environment. So this was a fun project. Let me just find my mouse. What have you left me? Okay. The introduction. Online teaching is not a new concept in education overall, and the method increased in popularity when we had the COVID pandemic. As you all know, we all had to make a sudden shift. Face-to-face teaching became impossible, and it remained a part of a blended learning approach in many of our educational programs and structures. It comes with multiple advantages and disadvantages, which requires educators to implement successful online teaching strategies so that we enhance and facilitate student learning at the end of the day. Online teaching became a core element of our blended learning approach. The method is flexible, it is accessible, students can engage with the course material remotely. However, it also introduced challenges, especially in professional disciplines like health sciences, like nursing education, where practical engagement is crucial. So by examining the perceptions of our undergraduate nursing students regarding online teaching at the private nursing education institution in the Eastern Cape, we could identify key factors that can influence the effectiveness of how we are giving online teaching to our students. I'm just having difficulty finding the mouse on this screen. The research problem, we mentioned already that our online class environment might pose a challenge for nurse educators to assess student engagement in actual class activities. So students are there as participants, but they don't complete discussion boards, they don't complete worksheets that you send out during online classes. They often miss a quiz that you present during that online class, which then makes you think, what are they actually doing? Are they paying for their coffee while in the online class? Are they washing their dog? Where are you? So you're in the class, but you're not in the class. And that obviously poses a risk to student learning because we have non-compliance with our assessment outcomes at the end of the day. So while studies from various other countries have highlighted, especially nursing students' experiences with online learning, there was a paucity in research specific to our South African content. And 2021, 2022, 2023 even, when we look at student perceptions or faculty perceptions regarding online teaching, we find COVID-related questions. So the environment was a lot different. That's the perceptions that we are seeing and the relations that it referred to. So the research question we wanted to ask, what are nursing students' perceptions regarding online teaching at a private nursing education institution in the Eastern Cape? So just to give you a bit of content or context to online teaching, we asked students at the end of their studies, after at least 1 year of studies, permanent students that were non-repeating, so they couldn't be influenced by previous online experiences, or they are better prepared to deal with it. And we also, the approach was look at all the online modules that we deliver, and it was delivered by specific nurse educators to all different learning centers. So whatever the students or the respondents' answers was based on that background, just so you know how the online teaching was facilitated. So the objectives and the aim, we wanted to assess students' perception, firstly on the online teaching modalities and application. That was one leg of it. The second leg of it, let's look at their perceptions of the online teaching environment and the support they receive in forms of technical support, but also social interaction, support from the facilitator. So we aim to explore students' perceptions of online teaching to develop evidence-informed recommendations to improve our online teaching practices. The theoretical underpinning of this study was based on the constructivism and connectivism theories. So constructivism theory basically saying students can't be passive receivers of what they learn. We need to actively engage, they need to build on their knowledge. Connectivism links well with that because it's saying, this is what I have, I'm learning this from another person, I'm learning this from a conversation with my peer, I'm getting this from my educator, and then make those connections for so that the starting point of learning can occur when learners connect and participate in this learning community. Basically telling us that students need to actively engage in online activities. The methodology that we used was a quantitative cross-sectional survey design. Population, non-repeating students, like I said, due to the increased familiarity with online teaching, which may influence their perceptions at the end of the day. We use students from the first, second and third year R171 diploma in nursing, as well as the 1 year 169 auxiliary nursing course. Our data collection, we used a structured self-administered questionnaire, so I went old school with that one. A field worker was used to distribute the questionnaire, and again focused on those 3 sections that was part of our objectives in the first place. Data analysis was done with the assistance of a statistician at NMU University, and we used thematic analysis for the 2 open-ended questions that was also in the questionnaire. Rigor, content validity, I will discuss the data collection instrument with you now, but we used previously used questionnaires with a high Cronbach alpha score that we adapted to fit the outcome of our research study. These were basically the sections that I spoke about. So firstly, just short questions on the participants' age, their gender, their program enrollment, and a little bit of technology infrastructure. What devices are you used or do you use to attend online class or do your online activities, as well as do you have internet connection, do you have power outages, just that infrastructure behind online classes. And then section B and section C, where the focus was on teaching modalities and specific instructional activities. Section C was the learning environment and the support that they received. Okay, so this was an example of our data collection instrument. So section B, all the teaching modalities that we used at the specific learning center that we used to present our online modules. And it includes instructional activities that was regularly used. There was 22 descriptive items, and then we also added 3 sections at the end pertaining to the students' understanding of the online modalities used. So I find it easy to navigate the online teaching platform. I understand the different platforms and applications used. Help is available when I do struggle. And then an open-ended question, do you have more comments, anything else you would like to add? Just to get a feel of how students experience our online teaching. And section C about learning environment. So determine students' perceptions on the learning environment. and student support questions. And here we were looking, if we look at the type of questions that we asked them, we wanted to gauge on their perception of learning, their perception of the educators, their perception of available support, as well as their social self-perception, which was surprisingly an issue, a major issue in our online class environments. So that was basically how the study was conducted and a bit of background data. What did we find? Section A was our demographical data, our infrastructure. 85% were female students, so it aligns with the nursing student context in South Africa. And obviously, given the small number of male participants or non-binary participants in the study, it wasn't possible to draw any meaningful conclusions about the impact of gender on our results. Our student population, 60% of them between the ages of 20 to 29, and it didn't have statistical or practical influence on the findings of the overall study. The majority of respondents attended online classes on a laptop, 69%, and 63% indicated that they use a smartphone to attend online class. 52% indicated they had only one device to choose from to do their online activities and to join online classes. So when we did inferential statistics on our results, and our findings were that the type of device did not significantly influence their perception. However, supportive literature showed that attending online classes on a laptop or a desktop is more beneficial because you're not distracted by phone calls, incoming messages. So given these insights, the recommendations should include that we ensure we provide students access to computer facilities if you don't own your own device other than a smartphone. And the program and year of study also became a very interesting field. So we saw a big difference between the perception of the students who had only a one-year course and the three-year course students. But the main difference was between both first years of those two courses. So we attributed that to the fact that if you have a course with a lower NQF level, and that course is jam-packed, everything in a year that you have to do, they have much more outcomes at the end of the day than their counterparts who's also first year, but they have got a bit of longer time to adjust to the system, and they are of a higher NQF level, so perhaps they came better prepared. And this leads us to make recommendations about how we should stagger activities for different NQF levels of students, how we should make sure that students are properly orientated and perhaps come with a predisposition where you have you've applied and you are approved to be one of our students, but you need technical agility. So here's a pre-course, do it in your own time, this will be part of your admission requirements. So it gave us quite interesting insights, although it was only the demographical data and technological infrastructure. Section B was quite interesting. We looked at our online teaching modalities, the instructional activities. I'm sure if you are part of the educator group and you are familiar with most of these instructional activities and technologies, it's the common ones that we all use and share. You can see that web-based games, Kahoot, worksheets, questions and quizzes received far better ratings. So the students had a Likert scale and they had to rate it. So our ratings for this section was very effective and extremely effective. And that is where we see that the suggestion here is interactive and multimedia rich activities significantly enhances our online learning experience. So basically meaning engage the students. If we similarly look at those receiving very low rates of being effective, we can see assigned readings. Can I take this off and just shout at you? because I'm sounding very strange to myself as well. Okay, so assigned readings, online textbook resources, case studies, voice-over PowerPoints, those were the things that students said that's not engaging, we don't find it effective, and we need to take cognizance hereof, because this is also where I realized what we're trying to do as educators is take a face-to-face lesson plan and throw it online. And it doesn't work, because in a face-to-face lesson plan, you'll share something with the students, they'll have time to discuss it, they come back with feedback, answers, we have that discussion. Online, if you take that same topic and you present it to the students and say, chapter 5, page 618 to 650, that's where you get your information from. When do you follow up? So how easy is it for your students to become competent in their own note-taking skills, in their own way of teaching and learning, to construct knowledge at the end of the day? And then we had an open-ended question where they could make recommendations, or apart from that list where they have to choose, does it work, does it not work for us? What else do you want to tell us about the teaching modalities that you're using and that we are exposing you to? So we had three themes derived from that open-ended question. First was students who had positive perceptions, and they were more than the negative perceptions, and then some had recommendations as well. So the positive perceptions, the overall perceptions was, like I said, slightly more positive than the negative one, and they said the effectiveness of quizzes, it challenged them to achieve higher marks on their own, and it also prepared them a little bit for what to expect in tests and exams. Obviously, like we all know, resource effectiveness, learning material is always available, it's self-paced, you can access it in your own time, and the comfort and resource effectiveness of not having to travel to college, cost involved in that, that was positive aspects or perceptions that the respondents mentioned. Some respondents mentioned that the information on the learning management system, which is in our case Moodle, a Moodle platform, was difficult to navigate. They mentioned that online teaching can become boring, negatively affecting their concentration and their ability to stay in the online class. And their recommendations included quite a lot about educators should be proficient in both how they present this online class, but also in assisting them with technical difficulties. So should I struggle to open an activity, or should I struggle to enter the specific chat room or breakout room, how's the educator as the first line person in this conversation going to assist me? And I think if you think back after COVID, you had 2 or 3 training sessions. This is Moodle, this is how you post it, this is where you get things from. But did you really have training, and will you say that you are proficient in facilitating that online lecture, and you know the background data of that learning management system, which can be Moodle, Blackboard, whatever system you are using? So that was quite interesting to see. I need to start finishing off now. Our research findings on the learning environment and student support. Most respondents agreed that they will pass their year of study, so they felt quite competent about that. They felt like the educators are good at, they still provide feedback, there's means of communicating with your educators. I think on that point, just remember it's blended learning, so they still see the educators back in face-to-face class the next week or 2 weeks after to clarify some of the online concepts. They didn't have issues finding a quiet place at home to be in this online class. They didn't have internet or connectivity issues, and then the positive perceptions took a nosedive. So they said they are bored during online class, they struggle to concentrate. More than 60% said they don't feel comfortable in online class. They disagreed that the atmosphere in online classes motivates them as learners, and they indicated discomfort with the lack of social interaction and meaningful connections with your peers during question and answering sessions. Academic self-perception items that was asked also indicated a lack of stimulation and personal development. They were uncertain whether online teaching really prepares them for problem solving and their intellectual curiosity. So the lack of stimulation and personal development really showed up in their perspective of online classes. The open-ended question, they had concerns about the timing and the duration of online lectures, the distractions and background noise within that online class. Should somebody not switch off their camera? Should somebody have their mic open? So that kind of distractions. And then in the open-ended question, they did mention that they don't receive timeous feedback on completed activities. Remember, in an online class, you can have 130 students. So as an educator, how do you provide timeous feedback to activities that's done? And based on that, I'm just perhaps going to skip a few things. We spoke about the dual nature of online teaching. On the one hand, flexible resource accessibility. On the other hand, we have technology burdens or barriers and the lack of social interaction that hinders engagement. The need to balance teaching and learning activities between synchronized methods and asynchronized methods, that really works, as the students indicated, using all of these, but only 3 out of the 14 is actually effective or is perceived as effective. So in conclusion, if we identify and address the challenge and we can leverage from those benefits of online teaching, we can enhance the effectiveness, ultimately improving our learning outcomes and student satisfaction. So we developed tools and recommendations, and just a quick checklist to tick off. Have you gone through all these? And the recommendations were also based on, firstly, our demographical data, the results from there, and secondly, our effective teaching applications and modalities that we used, and then the third part on student support specifically. How do we deal with big classes, big online classes? But I think this is a topic for another day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karine. We can open the floor to some questions. If there are any questions. Yes.
Thanks. This topic quite excites me. Can you just go back a few slides to the one with the modalities that they say is effective in the reform? Yeah, so I'm just going to ask, like on a slide like this, this is what the participants have basically schools at. Is there any correlation to the actual assessment performance?
Okay. So it's a good question that you're asking. We did univariate stats over the section B, section C items, and even section A items, and that's how we saw like the first year students don't compare. At the end of the day, this particular study did not look at assessment outcomes. So we were looking more at how does the different factors influences the overall perception, and our inferential statistics with that showed that if this isn't great, then the learning environment and support perception is also not great. So they're all interlinked with each other at the end of the day, showing that you need to get the basics right, or else you are going to make a mess of the rest as well. And at the end of the day, it will affect student engagement and active learning. So yes, but I have to say this particular study, we did not go into assessment outcomes at the end of the day. I think it's a good follow-up. I had this question before as well. The only question, one that I just threw in there at section C was, we asked the students, do you think that online quizzes are, what was the question? It was something about, is it easy to cheat in online quizzes? And how do you do that? And about 47% of them said yes. So they know how to. They know how to. So that was just for interesting, but I think you can top up the research from going into those avenues.
Okay, thank you. My question is around the demographics. You said there are 85% females who participated in the study. I wanted to know in terms of the demographics, in terms of race, just trying to link that to contextual factors that we have, because we say the students that responded well are those that are actually on the laptop. How about those who do not own a laptop? How do we bring the contextual factors given the type of students that we are working with? Did you find anything around that? Let's try to.
Okay, thank you for that question. My hypothesis originally was the same as what you are thinking about, and the line of thought you can use now. Sometimes in the beginning when you start your research, you have a certain idea of where we are going with this, and I just want to make recommendations accordingly. But it actually did show no practical or significant impact on our data, whether they were using a laptop or a smartphone. Like I said, supporting literature shows it's better than a desktop, but it didn't show a difference on our settings. And then to go back to what I think your question is, what's the environment of the students that's in that online class? Is the more privileged students going to give a more better perception and positive attitude about online classes? But the majority of our students indicated that we don't have issues accessing online classes, we don't have issues finding a quiet place to stay at home to attend these classes. So at the end of the day, it didn't have an impact. And we are grateful for that. We are grateful that in our country we can equip students from every background to attend online class. So I think that is quite important, and it was nice to see, because that was also not my expectation. I did expect a different answer to what we've seen in our findings.
Are they coming from different backgrounds though? Because the question is, what is their background?
Yes. So if you look at our, yes, I can just say that they are coming from different backgrounds. And if I have to be explicit, they are coming mostly from disadvantaged backgrounds, being at the college, yes. So definitely, no, I was delighted with the findings of that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Korean, for your very informative presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Do you want to use your own?
Are you using your own device?
Yes.
Okay. Then you can just be ready if you want to use ours.
I did make some changes.
Okay. Then you can just plug yours in. Then I'm gonna give it back. Okay.
Sure. I'm presenting alone.
I think you have to change your setting. There we go. Okay. We still have morning colleagues. So while Kagiso is busy setting up, I'm just going to do a short introduction. So Kagiso and Cindy, they worked on a presentation titled Leveraging Written Reflective Reports to Augment Survey Evaluations. to student engagement, right? So this is going to be quite an interesting one, and I think a really nice follow-up from what Karine just presented. A little background or bio on these two colleagues. So Mr. Likomo, he's a lecturer at the medical school. He is registered for his PhD in the Department of Human Movement Sciences, and he has an interest in student engagement, specifically in health professions education, as well as physical activity and public health. All right? And then his partner who worked with him, Ms. Boyson, also a lecturer at the medical school in the primary healthcare department. She holds a nursing science master's degree and is interested in primary healthcare as well as clinical simulations and interprofessional education and collaborative practice in health sciences. So while they are getting ready,
Right. Okay, good. Still morning.
still morning.
Okay, good. Good morning, colleagues. And thank you for the introduction. Okay, so yeah, so I agree. It is a nice follow-up. I was making some notes, thinking there are some words that we're specifically using that have been mentioned. So I guess that helps. So my name is Kagiso, and I'm working with Cindy over there. And we're presenting some work we've done using written reflections. It was mentioned earlier that students are reflecting against their will. So we start them at year one already. And we're trying to see if we can use those to augment survey data. So often, student engagement is evaluated using surveys. And so we're trying to see, can we use something that we're already using for student engagement as well. Okay, so I'll take you through an introduction, some method, or the method that we used for the study, what we found, and contextualize that a little bit, and then final remarks at the end. And in terms of the introduction itself, I'll define what we mean by student engagement, the different definitions around that. We'll identify methods to evaluate student engagement, as well as what's common here and uncommon there. Okay, so what we mean by student engagement is, well, first of all, it is a complex idea, so there are multiple components involved in it, and it is also dynamic, so it's non-linear. There are several influences on it, and it itself influences various factors within an educational environment. And I think just now it was mentioned that a learning environment can influence student engagement, and we couldn't agree more. Right, so the components of it, there's behavioral or contribution, right? So what am I actually doing in the class? And then there's emotional engagement, so the affect. How do I feel about what's happening in class, and how does that then influence factors? I think just now as mentioned, how students are talking about being bored, and how does that then influence their contribution or actual learning, and then the outcomes at the end. And then there's also the cognitive engagement, so the thinking stuff. Am I in class is sitting there absorbing absolutely nothing? Am I in class and am I thinking and actually learning? What's important about student engagement as a concept is that it influences various factors, including academic outcomes, right? And you can almost think about that class that you might have had, or module where actually something a bit more tangible. So for those that have 3 CPD points, you're on the last day of June and you click on this one online and it's like a 50-minute watch, and like, oh, come on, right? And then you go and look for another one. Or it could be a class that you're sitting in and you're really enjoying the content. How does that influence how much work you put into the actual task? And could it or could it not influence the outcome? Right, so given that it influences academic outcomes, there's increasing need and interest to evaluate student engagement and related outcomes. Here are several ways that we could evaluate student engagement. One is surveys, as mentioned. The other is observations. Then we have real-time assessments, so you can imagine checklists might be used here. Then there are qualitative interviews, as well as focus group discussions. So those surveys, as you can imagine, they are the most common, and one of the reasons for that might be that they are time and cost effective. just send it to you and you complete it, done. While with interviews, it takes a little bit more than that, and when you have to analyze that, it also takes a bit more time in that process. So I just want to take us back, just continue on the line of thought of using surveys. This is an example of a study that used surveys to assess and compare student engagement. So this is how they went about it. So to assess, basically, you can look at on our x-axis, we have the modules, so that's, and they're going up by year of study as well. And then on our y-axis, we have the total engagement score. So that's a total score and not the subcategories, right? So depending on the survey that you look at, they might have different subcomponents. Nevertheless, that's a total engagement score. And what's quite interesting here is that last module there, so in some instances, the higher up the levels you go, the smaller the class becomes. So you wonder if that's related to that at all. And then you can compare engagement. So you can either compare or between the modules or the subcategories as well. And as you can see there, that last module there, which is, I believe, advanced physiology with the smaller class, has the highest engagement score within the subcategories as well. So that's how one could use survey data. So taking you back to this slide, we talked about how you can assess student engagement. So we just want to highlight the last two there, which are interviews and focus group discussions, simply to say that while there are qualitative approaches to this, written reflections are not actually being used, which is quite interesting. And it's interesting to us simply because we have students reflecting against their will. We do reward them, but nevertheless. And they are, not just that we use them, but they're actually quite common in medical education internationally. And so there's nothing innovative we're doing in that sense. However, we wanted to see if we can use them to also look into student engagement. Having students completing surveys can be quite cumbersome. I'm tired now, man. So because we're using something that may tell us something about engagement, we thought we should investigate that by looking into it. So we set out to determine whether 55-word stories, so this is a reflective approach, literally just 55 words, can be used to elucidate student engagement, so the domains that we spoke about earlier, and whether we can use those to then augment survey data if you were to use a survey. So students were given these instructions, which is you've completed a practice session, write a short reflection based on that practice session. And they were given a link to an article that outlines the process with some examples, and the way they put their reflections together is also quite interesting. Some followed that approach, some didn't, but nevertheless. And we applied manifest and content, manifest and, what's the other one now again? Latent and manifest content analysis to analyze our data to try and see are there specific words being used, or are they alluding to a specific physical, emotional, cognitive engagement domain. So what did we find? We found that every reflection included at least one of the three domains that we spoke about, right? So we said it's cognitive, emotional, and physical engagement. However, not all of them included all of the domains, which is interesting to note. So here's an example of one that included all three of the domains. One can make a case for other elements here being related to either one of those other domains, but these are just some examples of concepts or words, terms that are specific and easy to pick out there. So being relieved or smiling awkwardly for emotion, and asking questions either to the patient or to the classmates, so that's more physical, actually doing. And then trying to remember, so that's cognitive engagement there. In other reflections, we could only find two or one domain. And here's an example on the left of two, and on the right, one specific domain there. What was quite interesting reading these is some students would use swear words, and you just chuckle, it's like in any case. So just to summarize here, all the reflections included at least one of the domains, and I've given you examples of some that include 3, 2, and a single domain. So we then thought about, is there any consistency between the domains and the reflections, as well as whether the reflections, or what it is that these reflections add to the typical survey data that is common. So there were barely any reflections that included 2 domains, which is quite interesting. I think the one I showed you was the only one. The rest were either 3 or 1. And where it was only 1 domain, they tended to be more emotional engagement, which is quite interesting. And then, of course, some reflections were more than 55 words. And that is something that will teach you how to use Moodle a bit more efficiently. And then what the reflections add is actually capture the student's voice, which is commonly missing in survey data. And we noted this specifically with emotions, where the surveys are more positively framed, while the reflections would bring out some negative emotions. Right, so I might feel anxious, for example, or I might be nervous and trembling and all the rest of it, which is quite interesting, because does that mean that it is synonymous with a low rating on a survey? Except that the survey asked a different word, so you can't quite infer that it is, though it may or it may not be. Right, and then also they would frame things differently. And here's an example here about memorizing, which is a word from one of the surveys. I think it's a survey of student engagement. So in our data, the students would say things like, forgot what I had to say, or then suddenly I remember. That relates to memory and cognitive engagement. They just didn't use that word, memorizing, but alludes to the same thing. Okay, so just as a reminder, we wanted to determine whether 55-word stories, so the short reflection approach, can be used to elucidate or the domains of student engagement, and whether they can be used to augment student engagement surveys. So we would say yes, they can elucidate the domains of student engagement. However, not all of the reflections will have all of the domains. So that's one caveat there. And yes, then we wondered whether that would be related to a low rating if you were using a scale. But of course, the words are quite different. And then another thing that we noticed was that the task of gathering information, which is a bit more complex than simply meeting and greeting someone, that yielded more of the domains than with simply meeting and greeting. It takes a lot more time. It's like, 2 minutes versus 10 minutes. So of course, you'll get a little bit more there than with the shorter task at hand. So we looked at several other studies, well, 2 specific studies that also looked into reflections. So this one was looking at the use of 55-word approach. And this was done with final year medical students. And what was clear from their data is that all the domains were apparent in their data. The only difference, of course, is that they didn't do the task to identify the emotions. The domains of student engagement. So what you then, it would be limited in terms of the domains of student engagement, because that wasn't the task. Nevertheless, we thought that that corroborates our data to some extent. We then looked into another study. Forgive me for the self-citing. But so in this study, the task was to elucidate the domain, or to see if the reflections can actually elucidate the domains of student engagement. And here it was the longer or less restrictive approach of the Gibbs cycle, so there was no kind of limit, just right. And what we could find here is that there were also elements of all these student engagement domains. And there were many instances of those, which was quite interesting. And one of the findings here was that the physical and cognitive engagement domains were related to the academic task. So the task that you do tends to matter a little bit, and again, the environment can influence student engagement. Another finding was that there were many specific emotions related to an example of the actual academic emotions, if I could give that as a term. I think from a table you could find a lot, which is almost like saying, okay, so here are some emotions I want you to use, okay, now use them, which wasn't the case, which was quite fascinating. And that also included those negative emotions, which tend to be missing in our, or the typical student engagement surveys. So what we can then sort of conclude here is that both long and short reflections can actually elucidate student engagement domains, and possibly then also to augment those survey items. Because of the detail that we could find in the longer reflection approaches, we think that longer, less restrictive reflections are a bit more compelling than might be the 55 words. Of course, then you have 55 versus possibly 7 to 10 pages of reading. Anyway, so specifically to augment survey data, we think that it would be valuable to look at similarities or the differences in the framing. And I gave you an example of emotions as an example there. And here you might think about what does the data confirm in terms of the survey data? What does it extend? So are there any words or terms that are used in extension 2? And whether it complicates the survey data in any way. And then also, in terms of the occurrence and consistency of the domains, how do you determine that? Would you want to use thematic analysis, for example? Would you want to use a more quantitative approach where I count the number of words or terms that relate to a specific domain? Would be interesting to do that, but then it kind of moves away from being qualitative in a sense. But that's one thing that you can think about. And then whether the reflections are more personal or they're related to the task at hand. I think in that study I showed you with, where they worked with final year medical students, they also looked at whether the students were reflecting about themselves personally or about the patients, and they kind of drew a graph over the 6 weeks that they had to do this to see from week 1 to 6, how was that going along, which is an interesting way to look at it. What it means in context, I don't know. And then, are the reflections positive or are they negative? That can tell you a little bit about your learning environment and how they are specifically engaging and how they're feeling in that environment, which can be probably a little bit more effective than if you were to use a survey where you're just saying, rate to what extent did you enjoy this class, instead of them telling you how they actually felt in the classroom. And then, are they forward thinking? Some of the students would say things like, between the first and the last one. The first one didn't go so well. Your first year, term 2, having to do interviewing someone in a group of 6. Of course, that's going to be a bit daunting. But then the second one went way better, which is quite nice to see, because then it means don't put too much on the first one. Maybe the ones that follow after that. And that's, I don't think, something that a survey itself could be able to tell you, nevertheless. Okay, so we would conclude by saying that the use of written reflective reports can identify and augment quantitative survey data of student engagement, and that whole process seems to be innovative. And that then also addresses recommendations by Kahu from, I think it's 2013, to actually add qualitative approaches to evaluating student engagement. So at least we've provided a way that you could do that. Our recommendation, however, is that integrate the reflection in the learning strategy or assessment strategy, however you want to look at it, so that it's just there. You don't have to go and ask them to do additional work. And then there is a caveat, however, to using reflections for this purpose, and it's that they can't actually contribute to the classical measures of strength or association because they're qualitative, and that they should be based on experiential learning experiences or activities rather than, you sat in class for 2 hours, write a reflection. It's like, yeah, but on what? Right, so it helps if it's on an experiential learning activity so that you get a little bit more in there as well. And yes, then more comprehensive models are a little bit more compelling in terms of comparing what we found to other studies that have looked into this. And of course, you need more large-scale multi-institution studies to kind of confirm what we found. We had a very low turnout, hence we ventured into looking at other studies to see what they could find. I mean, with a sample of 8 units at 55 words, that's heavily limited. But other studies do kind of confirm that a little bit. So maybe we're onto something. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you.
obviously, because this is part of my module. But excellent presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I enjoyed all the discussions that we had about developing a reflective practitioner. So I'm actually now taking the opposing view that you're finding Gibbs more compelling, and I'm wondering, 55 words to me actually sounds more authentic, because my challenge with Gibbs is that students are using AI. And you detect it, and the writing is so perfect, and that's not how you speak in class. So I don't know if you have had any sort of thoughts or discussions on how do you mitigate for the use of AI, because we do tell students we want to develop authentic reflective practice, and so AI, but students being students, they're doing it, as you say, sometimes unwillingly or for the mark.
Yeah. Yeah, I did attach a Turnitin checker on, because I had this, it was this year actually, on Moodle instead of submit the file. And there weren't any from when I was just skimming through that used it. Yeah, it's tricky because, with AI, it also doesn't say the student did, it says they may have. And the challenge, of course, there is that you're not telling me that they did, so what can I do with that? So it's tricky. If you ask them to come and do it in one sitting, perhaps, but then does it retain its authenticity? I don't know. Yeah, you might also need to think about why are they using AI? What can they tell you about why, and how do you then get around that? I think we've had a short chat with Julia at some point as well, when she said students do what they do for different reasons. It's helpful if you know why, because it could be something unrelated to me being a student in your class that's affecting me using AI. And if you can understand that, you can better be able to address that. So I don't have a solid answer.
No, but I think that's helpful. Yeah, thinking maybe about why.
Yeah.
Why do they want to form in a different way?
Yeah.
Authentic. Maybe it's also got to do with what we said earlier about science and voices.
Possibly.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you. It was very interesting. And while you were talking, especially when you say that using it for the practical, the experiential part, we often see that students don't always fully understand what the practicals are about. Did you feel that this gave them more insight?
Into what the task was about?
Yes.
Not quite, because I don't know, the task in my mind seems very straightforward. It's just talk to this simulated patient and figure out why they're there. And we give them a guideline for how to do that. We attach a model to the teaching. So the task is apply what we discussed in the previous term now with the patient. So I don't, it's hard to say. I think they understood because we do have a facilitator to guide and give feedback as well. So from the reflections themselves, not quite. They all actually wrote about their experience in the class, which was quite interesting, while sometimes they can tell you what they had to do in the entire 55 words, and then it's not quite the reflection, which is not what they did. Which leads me to think, I think they understood the task. Maybe I should say, I hope they did. Sure. Cool.
Thank you very much, Kathy.
Thank you. This is going to fall.
Okay, while we wait for our next presenters to set up.
Sorry. Must I put this on? No problem. It's already on. Don't worry about that. No. I hate this. Okay. There you go.
Just see if you sharing.
You see, no, this can stand
Sorry. Okay. We still just unfolding. Okay, so we have our next two presenters, Professor Frisa and Professor Soji. They are going to be talking to us about the readiness of hybrid learning by staff and students in the Faculty of Health Sciences, which again I feel is a really nice follow-on from the previous discussion. Professor Frisa, okay, is the head of department of the Human Nutrition and Dietetics Department, but in the School of Lifestyle and Behavioral Sciences. And she is involved in various interprofessional, educational, and nutritional projects within Nelson Mandela University as well as external. Professor Soji is the Director of School for the School of Lifestyle and Behavioral Sciences, and she has extensive experience in teaching students and in counseling as well as managing a team of staff during trying times such as the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm going to hand over to these two illustrious colleagues. Thank you.
Okay, use this. It's still morning. Good morning, everybody. As I am the one that speak the most or talk the most, I will do the presentation. As an introduction, we know COVID has passed, but we have learned so much from that time, and as was for us an example of a pandemic or a disaster, and it had a profound impact on education. I think one of the industries where it had the most impact was education. And we then saw that it's not business as usual. We have to do things different. Things like online may not be suitable for every program and for every aspect of a program. We could see that it does play a role and it can be very positively used. And we also know that an approach like using both, whether we call it hybrid or blended, or whatever we call it, there are many different ways that we can use it, can be the best, because we can add or we can combine the best of all the worlds that we use. And we also saw that one of the most powerful predictors of success in this type of learning is the attitudes and the perceptions with which we as lecturers, but also from the student side, we approach it. In Nelson Mandela University, our learning and teaching approach includes to look at blended or hybrid learning as a strategic priority, but it does call for new learning and teaching strategies. We can't just do as we had to do in an emergency situation and go on. We have to look at new things. And we don't always know whether our students are really prepared for it. We think we know. We think we know that what we do and this will be the best. We think it will be the best to have this hybrid, but is it really? We have to look at that. For research on the factors that contribute to students' academic success, we need to have information on this environment where we use blended learning. Very few studies so far have also examined the influence of the student demographics. We know that we have a very diverse student group, and is it the best for everybody? Research has also shown that students coming from lower socioeconomic circumstances, where they did not have a computer at home, and when schools may not have effectively taught learners to use computers, may have difficulty adapting to online learning. Do we take that into consideration? And we know that our students also struggle to get devices, and it comes after half the year, etc. We also know that the learning styles of students can have an effect and can play a role. And so what does it tell us? Is it really the best way? And with the high number of NSFAS students that we have, we know that these factors do play a role. Just the study group, it is not only us that's in the study group, it is the School of Behavioral and Lifestyle Sciences, and is more or less the committee, the Teaching and Learning Committee or Learning and Teaching Committee that is involved, and all played a role in the study. We started with the idea, the concept of the idea already 2020. We have done the quantitative part in 2023, and in 2024 we did the qualitative part, and I saw quite a few members sitting here that participated in the study, and I am thankful that you did. Okay, if we look at the aim, it was really to look at the attitudes and the perceptions of the staff and the students, and our objectives were then multi, and we want to look at correlations, and we want to look at competencies and also at resources. I can mention that at this stage we have not really started looking at the correlations. We've just now analyzed all the qualitative data. So the next step will be that we look at the correlations. And you will see when I discuss it, we have a part of learning styles in there. We also did not yet analyze the learning style section. The design, we have two quantitative questionnaires, one for staff and one for students. The students' questionnaire had 42 questions, and that was closed questions, and 7 that was brief open questions. And the staff were 20 questions, that's closed, and 5 that was brief open-ended questions. We had qualitative focus groups for the discussion to give more in-depth answers on those open questions, and it was to see the experiences of online learning, and specifically the online part, the perception and of the positive and the negative aspects, and the challenges of what we will call hybrid learning, but it can be any like blended learning, what students perceive as competencies that they should have. And in the focus groups for the staff, we also look at their own experiences, their perceptions, and what they perceive as competencies what the students should have, both them and the students. And the requirements and how far we meet the requirements for hybrid learning. The target population was then the students in health sciences. In 2022, when we started with the study, there were 2,974. As you know, since then, our numbers increased a bit, but it was targeted towards all students. We used a non-probability convenience sample of all who agreed to participate. To the students, we have sent a bulk email via memo to participate, and we also asked the heads of the departments to remind the students about it. And to the staff, we wanted to go through a memo, and then we decided it's better, it's more personal, to go via the heads of departments, and we asked them to encourage staff to participate, and it actually worked very well. We wanted 500 students. We did not 100% get that, I will come back to it, but we wanted, I think, 18 staff members, and we got more of them and that participated. Yes, for the focus groups of the students, we wanted 44 to 66 students, depending on data saturation. And we did get enough students also to participate in that, and sent 16 to 20 academic staff members, and we also got that amount. Okay. The questionnaires were analyzed for descriptive results and the correlations. As I said, we have not done that yet. That is coming. And the focus groups was the year later, and it was transcribed and themed. And then we discussed the themes from there. You can see from the students, we had a very good distribution with 25.2% first years, 34.5% second years. It was interesting that we have so many second years. They are now third years, and the last group was fourth years plus, so it was also the postgraduate students. That was 14.2. 76.3% was females. Don't know why the males didn't participate so well. Let me just take this way that I can see also. Interestingly, again, 33.4% is Xhosa, and 25.2% English speaking as home language that participated, and 34.7% from the schools. From them came from schools where there were no computers, and we just want them to jump in and do it. And look at 72.1% that had no online learning before they come to the university. And it's something that we have to remember. Okay, if we look at the results from the students, 66.4% is comfortable learning online. So they adapt very quickly. 63.5% was they felt that they are learners that can go independent and on their own time. So something like online learning is not a problem for them. They have enough self-discipline. 52% learn and work best on their own. It shows also that they are moving more towards being adults that can work on their own. 71.7% have the necessary equipment. It says well from coming with nothing. And 53.3% can benefit from the classes on online learning, and that is something that we have to take note of. They want to learn how to use it much more. 71% said they like to do tasks in advance. Now I know that is not what we experience when everything is given in on the last date, or on the last time, on the last hour, or later. But they say they like to do it in advance. It could be because they didn't have enough time to do everything in advance. Interestingly, the students did not understand this question very well. They had to tell us which one of the types of the learning do they prefer the best. As you can see, some of them chose, they preferred the best more than one. So we have done, it doesn't count up to 100%, but it is clear that most of them prefer a hybrid form. You would have thought that most would prefer only online, because that's what you often hear. But they also need that face-to-face classes and that face-to-face interaction. If we look at the staff, 7% was here more than 7 years. So it was experienced staff who participated. Again, more the females. 90.9% reported that they get poor responses from students during online classes. So students like it, but they don't participate. And I think we can all have experienced that. 54.5% felt that they will benefit from more classes. So even staff feel that they need more classes. Now, I felt a bit, do we always participate or take advantage of what we have? We say yes, we want more, but there is so much that it's already there. It might also be that we don't always use what is available. And 63.6% felt that the students will benefit from more classes. They feel that students are not ready. And there again, I think especially in the first year, we should encourage our students to use what is really there. But then we have to know what is there. So we have to investigate. The staff did understand the question, and there you can see that 59.1% said that they prefer teaching hybrid. And also they also said that still nowadays they take part, so that was last year, they do use this, they use hybrid learning. It is here to stay. But there are even a few that says online learning only, and then there are a few that want to teach face-to-face only. If we look at the focus groups, there were many answers that were in both the student focus groups as well as the staff focus groups. I just want to show you there that answers were very similar. So in both cases, after 3 focus groups, we had saturation. And we did not continue because we got the same answers every time. But problems that they have is the internet connectivity. Load shedding, yes, load shedding is past, but it's not really past. We still have problems. And then poor internet, that's not necessarily connectivity. And that they cannot concentrate, or low attention span, or that they're easily distracted. Even the students acknowledge that that is their problem, that they multitask, do something else too, etc. One of them in the focus group said an interesting thing also that we actually know is that they don't concentrate while the lecture is going on. So they think it's time saving, but now they have to go back to the notes again. So it's not really time saving. And they think it helps them because they don't have to get here, etc. But in the end, they actually spend more time because they haven't concentrated then, and they have to go back and look at the notes. And then a problem for them with the online classes was that there's no interaction. And we have seen that also as staff, that students' social skills suffer if they are only online classes, and that it's for the students difficult to ask questions. And we have seen it also in Mr. Makoba's discussion this morning, and what we have also heard now is it's difficult for students to ask questions to a staff member. They will rather ask it from the students. And online, it's even more difficult for them. Why, I don't know, because I thought, people don't see you. But it seems that they find it even online more difficult than in class. And they feel that it's too impersonal. Again, from both groups, we've asked the most important advantages from online learning, and it's the convenience and the flexibility, that they can sit in bed and study and have the lecture. So it saves time, travel costs, and they can listen to the lectures again is something that I think nearly all the students said. The fact that they can go back and look at it. And also, if some of them mentioned that they don't have books, so that it helps them if they can go back to the lectures. So maybe one can think of how to combine that aspect with the rest. If we look at also students and staff, the most important problems of face-to-face classes is this transport that we know, the full classes, bad weather, and they cannot listen again. And then if we look at the advantages is the interaction, that they can stay focused. So in class, it's easier for them to be focused, and they have a better understanding, and there's more communication, and so they felt that there is no advantage by some. The student focus groups, they most like the hybrid learning, but it does create confusion, especially because we don't know always is it now online or is it in class. And another one is if the online classes and the face-to-face is on the same day. Now they are at the class, but where are they now going to sit to do the online class? So this with their two most of their biggest problems. If we look at the staff, the flexibility was something for them that is important, but the fact that it adds to workload, that it is also more administration, and that staff don't always know how to do it effectively. And they say that it must be followed up with tests to see whether the students did listen. If we look at the staff focus group, we have sort of a mind map of skills that is most important. Creativity was mentioned by nearly everyone. Dedication, because it takes hard work. Computer literacy. If we look at the students, interestingly, they say accountability. Again, computer literacy. They also mention dedication and commitment. Time management was an important aspect that comes through, and they must learn to concentrate. These are my references, and thank you, and also thank you to all the other participants in our study.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prof. We're going to open the floor to any questions or comments.
Hello everyone. In terms of connecting, data, it was online. So were you able to distinguish between the first years, second years, third years, and fourth years? Because I think when collecting data for the part of which learning method they prefer, you might find that the first years would have preferred face-to-face, while the third and fourth years might prefer different methods.
Definitely. We do have a way. They had to tell us with their first or second year. And as I said, we haven't done the correlations yet, because that is one of the things that we will definitely look at in the correlations, because you're quite right, I expect that there will be a difference between third years of seniors and juniors.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perhaps not a question, but just a comment I would like to make. Thank you, it was an interesting presentation. I think the nature of our profession, being healthcare professionals or nurses or pharmacologists or all our health-associated professions, the nature thereof is human interaction.
Yeah.
And I think we'll always find in our facilitators and our students that hybrid will be the most acceptable option, because we do want that social interaction at the end of the day by nature of our profession. So it's interesting that link.
Yeah, you're quite right, and I always say you can't cook rice online. So you have to have a practical. You can't. You think you can consult a patient online, but you can't really, because you can't see the body language when you consult. And you have to. That students also have to learn, and we have seen in 2020 that our students' social skills did take a dip, and it's definitely, I agree with you, although that shows more the face-to-face learning, but online learning teaches other skills and other things that we need our students to have. So I want to agree with you.
I don't know, it's not a question, but just something that came to my mind. I wonder if the readiness, or whether we agree that hybrid is the best, also would almost be linked to the type of modules that we teach. If you think about theoretical modules and practical modules, but we can cook rice online via simulations, and we can watch a YouTube video. But I think the context of health sciences for me has always been very complex when we look at hybrid learning and so forth. I had the I had the privilege of guest lecturing for a module online, and yeah, it was quite an experience for a module, for like a unit that, you know, that needs us to engage and critically discuss like something, and you have students who are like, my audio is not working. So yeah, I think the type of modules, and you know, sometimes the content of the module even, it will almost like influence whether we think that we're ready for the hybrid learning.
Yes, I fully agree.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's eye-opening. I just wanted to attest to the last statement that you said, Prof, regarding the online phases versus online class versus face-to-face on the same day. It's been challenging. I've been battling with it, but this year I must say the team that I was teaching with on the same level, we would consult each other to say, how are you planning your lesson for next week? How are you planning? So that even if the previous lecturer wanted to change the next week to online, you can also evaluate your own lesson plans to see if you can match them for the students' benefit. But previously, what was not working was that I would go first and wanted to teach face-to-face. But then on the morning of the class, the students are saying, but the next class is online, could you change your class to online? And I'm thinking, but I can't change now, and then if you can't change now, then it means that you are rigid or not allowing flexibility and all of that. But we spoke about it, sensitize the class reps to say, as soon as you realize that the structure is face-to-face, but as soon as you realize there's a planned online session, just check with whoever else is in touch. But I want to say that the lecturers that we teach on the same level this year are very good. The students don't have to do it. We solve it amongst ourselves, and then we can break it up. Otherwise, it's challenging to have both face-to-face and online at the same time. The student will always opt for an online class, and then your face-to-face class will be empty. And there's a reason why that class has to be face-to-face.
Yes, agree.
Okay.
Thank you. Colleagues, I don't think what I have is a question. It's more a kind of a statement in terms of the way forward. Yeah. And I've got that other hat on, obviously, you know, for the professional. Thank you. I just think what your study does, because we talk about these things a lot, and very often we get ourselves into it's either online or it's face-to-face spaces, you know, that have got to meet the conversation that we often end up on. When I look at your results here, then you see that people, you know, the participants, I think on both sides, talk about the hybrid formats that we need to adopt, because it seems to, because, you know, with the study what you had is to see what are the gaps, what are those loopholes, what are those holes that you fall into, but what are those learnings that we should not lose.
Yes.
So the statement, you know, here is almost like we have to think about how do we continue this discussion with its findings and, you know, everything else that you're going to do with the data as well, as a constant conversation within this faculty to see how we, in our diversity but in the bigger context of health sciences, etc., are able to look at what would hybridity look for us here.
Exactly.
You know, across our qualifications.
Yes. And with that, all the practicalities, for example, the online versus the face-to-face in the same day.
So I can't ask a question to our own just a comment. I think this presentation emanated from a colloquium that we had as a school, if you can still remember. And we invited experts in hybrid. And what we learned in that colloquium was that what we refer to as hybrid is not necessarily hybrid. So we're calling it hybrid now, but it's not hybrid. So we're speaking about blended.
Yes.
And the institution had made a statement at the time, because we invited them, and they said that they were advocating for a blended approach to learning. I want to follow up with what you're saying, Prof. Care, to say that as an institution, we're not ready even for blended approach because we don't have smart classrooms.
Yes.
Because if we want to do proper blended approaches, we need to make sure that there are resources that are available.
Yeah.
And maybe it's high time that we go back to the institution, go back to COLLOQUIUM and any other partners to be able to
Yes,
share these
exactly.
results. Because it is convenient for both students and staff members, not necessarily a matter of convenience. I always say that we don't learn from a crisis. We don't use the advantages of a crisis. When we had Fees Must Fall, we learned things. And then when it was done, we quickly went back to how we were doing things. Then COVID came, we were not ready. When we were engaging with other universities to find out how did you get yourselves ready, they said, we learned from Fees Must Fall and we just built from there. So as a university, we have this tendency to not learn, we miss those learning moments. And maybe we need to take this forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Okay. Our last presentation for this afternoon is going to be Mr. DiComo and Ms. Akadeen, and they are going to be doing a presentation on leveraging clinical communication skills to augment the student innovators toolkit, an approach to enhance user interviewing during design thinking. So for the colleagues who joined, I'm going to do a quick introduction for Gatiso again. So he's an academic within the medical school, and he has a passion for public health as well as innovative educational and learning and teaching strategies, and a current PhD candidate. Then we have Ms. Akadeen, who is an academic literacy and reasoning specialist within the medical school, and she holds a master's degree in applied language studies, and she has an interest in academic literacy, teaching language and its influence on identity construction. Okay. Also, colleagues, if I can please just remind you, as we're going into lunch, if you can please ensure that you scan the barcode, please.
Okay, I guess this is a hey guys, it's me again moment. Okay, thank you for the introduction. My colleague Raisa couldn't make it today, so I'm kind of alone for this one. Okay, so we'll get to it. Right, so for this presentation, I'll take you through an introduction as well as our problem, the approach to address the problem, and then the solution which we think is applicable here, and then some educational considerations regarding our solution. Okay, so for the introduction, I'll firstly define what we mean by design thinking. I'll take you through its applications in higher education, and then also a problematization, and I'll talk to you about why that's the case when we talk about the approach, and then a brief overview of the solution before we start talking about the approach itself. Okay, so design thinking is a systematic process. Think of it as a method, and it is characterized by working with the user for the user. So you first need an end user. Some people would say that you work with to design for. So you need a multidisciplinary, diverse team, ideally, for things to really work. And I think we heard quite a bit about diversity this morning. We also heard about innovation, and design thinking is typically applied for innovation. Right? So you problem solve towards innovation. So that's really what that is about. The method itself, there are different versions. I'm going to talk to you here about the D-School method, or the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design at Stanford. So this one has 5 modes or stages. The first is empathize. not the dictionary definition of empathy, though you do apply it in some way. So to empathize, you really want to know who is your user, what is their context, and how do they interact with their context. And you might use interviews to do that. You might use observations, and then you might immerse yourself in that context as well. You then understand that information and formulate a point of view in the defined, so that functions a little bit like a problem statement that guides the way forward. You then come up with ideas in the ideate phase, and then create low fidelity prototypes that you then test with your user. So it sounds like it's linear, but it really isn't. It's very participatory back and forth, and you don't just go from point 2 back to 1. You could go from point 4 back to 1. So it's iterative as a process in that sense. So we're specifically talking about the empathy phase, right? So empathizing and what that means throughout the rest of the discussion. So in this paper, we learned several things about its applications in higher education. One, that it's quite popular, including health sciences education. And it is applied, as I said, in education, undergrad and postgrad, in fields such as the humanities, business, health sciences education, and engineering. And I'm specifically saying health sciences education, avoiding health professions education or medical education here. So follow that one with me. And then that it is applied in various parts of the world, including Europe, Africa, the Americas, and the rest of it. In South Africa, there's an example of its application in health sciences education in a module at master's level called Health Innovation and Design. And what we can learn from this work is that students had limited experience in qualitative interviewing. So remember I said in the empathy mode, you can use interviews, which I will call user interviewing or user interviews. So there's that link there that we're drawing. And because of that, students then struggle to maintain conversational flow when they're engaging with their user. And the implication, of course, as you can imagine, is that it compromised that engagement. So we think that clinical communication skills and models can be a way of addressing that limitation. And there are various examples of models. Let's start there. Here are a few examples. I'll specifically talk to you about that fourth one, which is a Calgary-Cambridge framework or guide that we use in our program on the other side. So that's a textbook which is based on that Calgary-Cambridge guide, and it includes many examples of skills, I think over 70 communication skills in line with that model. And there's evidence from education and clinical practice for the value and applications of this model, as well as those skills. And they integrate them or weave them, the skills that is into the guide or the framework. So we think that this can be a way of addressing, and I'll talk to you about the how. But first, I'll give you a brief overview of this guide. You first start with a meet and greet, right? And there are various things you can do in there. It's not so. Yeah. So hi, come in, have a seat. We say avoid asking people how are you, lest they tell you, and you're not ready to hear it just yet. So try and avoid that. In any case, so here you might meet the person, find out why are you here, right? And then you transition into collecting your information in a clinical setting, your biomedical patient's perspective. So my personal experience of this problem and the background information that's happening all the time. And then you might do a physical examination, and then you might give information based on what you have found up to that point, and then you might close your interview. As you do that, you might take your patient along with, providing structure, and you might establish in the beginning and then maintain that rapport that relationship that you then build from the beginning. So that you do constantly throughout. So we would like to then draw similarity between clinical communication or clinical interviewing, I should say, and user interviewing, where the whole point is just to collect relevant information that you can use. And with that in mind, we aim to then conceptualize how clinical communication skills can be used to improve user interviewing. If you think back to that study, they were saying they struggled to maintain conversational flow, and it compromised user engagement because they had limited qualitative interviewing. So for us, it's convenient because we do clinical communication skills. Someone could say, but why don't you use qualitative interviewing from a research perspective? The skills are so similar that it's kind of the same thing. But for us, the model helps a lot because you use a model and then you add the skills into it. Okay, so how did we go about with that? So it's a conceptual study in essence, and we use the theory adaptation typology to do that, and that's really just to add something onto something that already exists. And to do that, you start with a problematization. So our problem is the limited experience in qualitative interviewing, which then compromises the quality of user engagement. And for this typology, you need a domain and method theory. The domain theory is really just the problem, in essence, right? So in our case, it's the user interviewing in design thinking, where students struggled with user interviewing. And what's notable here is that the pedagogical application of design thinking in higher education is actually not well understood. So we thought, brilliant opportunity. And on the other side, the method theory is what you then use to improve the conceptualization that is in discussion. In our case here, it's clinical communication skills and a model. Yes, in that sense. Okay, so I'm first going to give an example of how students can actually apply these skills and a model. So what we have here is what's in the D-School toolkit. So they say you should introduce yourself, the project, build rapport, question statements, evoke stories, and thank and wrap up. Not much else is given to this, so perhaps no wonder students struggled with interviewing. If you just think back to what I said earlier, you need a diverse team with different perspectives and backgrounds. And of course, if you have people outside of health sciences, you know, I mean, take an engineer and put them in that setting. You're putting people in an environment that they maybe are not actually prepared for. So there's also that conversation to have. In any case, so I'm going to now overlay some of the skills from that framework that we think can be helpful. And to introduce yourself, that greeting, give your name and your role. And you might also say, you can call me this, right? And then you get the user's name and how they would like to be addressed, right? So you're kind of establishing that rapport already. And then to introduce the project, have a shared agenda in the Calgary-Cambridge guide. So the essence here is, what are we talking about? Let's both be clear on that. And then time framing, how much time do we have, if you can give an estimate, and then signposting or transitioning between the different parts of your conversation. Then to build rapport, a social question, it's fairly warm today, so that could be something that you can kind of comment on. And then being friendly and smiling in that process there, and then gaining consent. So is it okay if we continue this conversation? Then to question statements, so there's several techniques that can be used here. We think the OR, so open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries can be helpful. Then coning or cone questioning technique, starting with an open question, following that up with an open but more focused question, and then a clarificatory closed question to end that line of questioning. And then non-verbal skills, so we use the SOLAR technique. Let's see if I can remember it. Sitting square, open posture, leaning slightly forward, making comfortable eye contact, and then a relaxed posture, right? So we would argue sitting like that, for example, but there's a good example. And some people also say you shouldn't cross your legs, and some say, but how did you see under the desk? In any case. And then there are various other skills that you could add in there, some of which are seeking emotion, and you could do that directly or indirectly. And then since you're seeking emotion, how about knowing how to handle that emotion? So that's a secondary part to that. And then silence, or that empathic pause, as awkward as it can be. And then pacing. So when you start asking about emotions, maybe slowing your pace down a little bit. So those are some of the things that you can use to do that. So if you think back to that Calgary-Cambridge guide, the gathering information part is where you would do the questioning statements and evoking emotion, mostly. And then at the end, you might give a summary of what you've been talking about and what you understood, and then ask that the patient confirms, or in this case, your user can confirm that you have understood what they said. And then you can also give a structuring statement, what happens after this. So this is how we think, students could be applying these skills in a design thinking context. So we're also aware that this idea comes along with many implications. And I'll just briefly talk you through some of those that we think are relevant. So one would be curriculum development. The other would be faculty development. And we heard quite a bit about that earlier, actually. And then the last thing would be adding research along with what it is that you amend if you were to do that in a program. In terms of curriculum development itself, so we think adding some of these things would be quite handy. So first of all, with learning outcomes, the idea is that students should be able to apply the skills and a model, and then they should be able to simulate a user interview. So we say simulate a patient, so we talk about simulated patient encounters. So just borrowing from that and saying simulating a user interview by applying the skills as well as a model. In terms of teaching strategies, didactic lectures, maybe they might need to be online. And then skill spotting videos to really just apply those skills, but being able to kind of point them out if someone were to show those to you. And then role playing, obviously, if you're going to simulate, you might as well role play or actually simulate it with a simulated user. We would say simulated patient. So just kind of swapping words here. And then in terms of an assessment strategy, you might use written tests, for example. Maybe online quizzes might need to come in here as well to assess knowledge. And then to assess competence, you might do a simulated user interview. We would say simulated patient interview. And then written reflections, again, against their will. So this is how we think curriculum development could look like if a design thinking course would say, okay, so we want to add this in there. And then in terms of faculty development, so in this study, the authors are actually clinically trained. Don't ask me how I know that. Okay, the one has MD, so obviously they are. So this might not be the case in every design thinking course. Right? You find some at science or education and whatever else. And so not everyone will be clinically trained. In fact, even in health sciences, you find that people aren't. And that South African example I showed you, none of the authors or the lecturers in that program are clinically trained. So not all the instructors would be, and therefore we think that it's valuable to then teach your faculty on how to teach the skills, what these skills are, what the models are, and then how to assess the skills along with that. We also think that collaborations with established clinical skills training units is valuable. They can provide input on what can you teach, how can you teach it, and how to assess it. They might also be able to talk to the research part of it. Yeah. Right, then the implications for research as well. I think we saw this earlier. So what they say in their studies is that the pedagogical application of design thinking in higher education is not that well understood at this point. It's popular, but not well understood. And so there are curriculum implications, teaching and learning, assessment, implementation, and all the rest of it. So it's important to look into these things if you were to actually amend a program. And we think that contextually or specific, context-specific, I should say, research is important to do. And I think maybe that context-specific is the main part here. Right, so we think that action model, like the knowledge to action framework, which is a process model, is a way to go about with this. And that's really just to know how we translated evidence into practice. And then to kind of retrospectively think what went wrong where, that's if things go wrong. Then and then qualitative investigations to generate an idea of experiences and recommendations would be, I suppose, indicated there as well. And then in terms of evaluation, Proctor's taxonomy of implementation outcomes can be used to try and figure out whether there is success and where that success lies can be integrated into an implementation framework or theory, such as the normalization process theory. And that's again to just generate an understanding of influences on those outcomes, whatever the outcome is. And then, different quasi-experimental designs can be used by faculty, maybe more specifically, to see what actually worked and what we did. So effectiveness. Okay, so in summary, we do think that clinical communication skills and a model have potential to enhance user interviewing, and that would then address the problem identified in that example from South Africa by Funda Verstesen and colleagues. There are some implications, as I've discussed, for curriculum development, faculty development and research, and that collaboration with established clinical skills training units as quite important. That is it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. We're going to open the floor to questions, comments.
And I didn't even have to use my yellow card.
No questions.
I was just thinking when we were talking about the non-verbal
Yes.
behaviors, that in social work and psychology we have acronyms for those. We use SOLA and FENORI.
Okay.
Like sit squarely, open posture, leaning forward, eye contact, relax. Because those are the things where you need to be aware of how you appear, because the issue is it's non-attentive behaviors.
Yes.
Inviting responses. Yeah. Maybe we can.
Yes, definitely. We'll do. We'll definitely pop you an email.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for the time.
Interesting.
It's a very interesting session. I think they all work really nicely together, and it's a really nice build up for this afternoon as well. So thank you. Please remember to scan and have a lovely lunch. Thank you after that.